Now after 2 days he departed from there and went into Galilee, into Cana of Galilee, where he made the water wine. And there was a certain nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. Go your way, your son lives. And himself believed in his whole house. This is, again, the second miracle that Jesus did when he was come out of Judea to Galilee. So as I said, I think this is the perfect time to put the mention in Luke 3:19 through 20 that Herod threw John the Baptist in prison, because it's during that time that Jesus is away from John the Baptist. It's sometime during the gap of time that he was baptizing with him, and he came back to Jerusalem and spoke about John the Baptist in past tense. So I moved it here, and I was just postponing until I found a good place for it. So now it's already right here. I'm leaving it as it is. And after that, I'm just going to continue right along with John 5. Back to blue. After this, there was a feast of the Jews. I have to mention something here. Michael Rood has a note. Let me read it. Concerning this passage, John 5:1. In the King James Version, the Greek text of John was rendered, "After this there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem." It must first be noted that no one remotely familiar with the Hebrew culture in first century Israel would ever casually refer to one of the feasts of Jehovah as a feast of the Jews. Yohanan, John, the Jewish author, would have named the feast, and every Israelite would have known that the only feast that occurs at this time of year is the feast of Shavuot. The Greek translators, however, being completely unfamiliar with the prophetic significance of this feast and having nothing remotely associated to it in their culture, simply classify the divine appointed feast of Shavuot as an insignificant and lowercase feast of the Jews. It must further be noted that the British refused to follow their own rules of capitalization and further minimalized the Feast of Jehovah by refusing to capitalize the proper noun, Passover, or even Sabbath. However, they did painstakingly capitalize both Satan, Mark 1:13, and the name of the Babylonian fertility goddess, Easter, in Acts 12:4, which does not even appear in the Greek text, but replaced the word Pascha, which is Passover, in the original text of the Acts. To be honest, it's a proper noun. It's a proper noun. It should be capitalized. It's a name of an event, a name of a thing. It's not just mentioning like a tree or a rock or a car. No, it's an actual name, so it should be capitalized. But I'm going to leave it as it is in this version, in the King James Version, and in the King James Version Easy Reader for all those who must have their tradition but just want to read through it in chronological order in a single timeline. And then in my version, I will capitalize the names Passover, Sabbath, and possibly even the word feast, because that's part of the title. Feast of the Jews. And Jesus went up to Jerusalem.
Now, John chapter 5, verse 1, there was a feast of the Jews, Yeshua went up to Jerusalem. What is the feast that's coming up? Shavuot. Remember, from Nicodemus, the counting of the Omer, we count 7 Sabbaths. The day after 7 Sabbaths, we are to be back at Jerusalem for the feast of Shavuot, the feast of weeks in the spring, Pentecost. John chapter 5, verse 1, it's the feast of Shavuot. It doesn't say that, it just says it's the feast of the Jews. But when we go up, we see exactly what happens, because the first thing that happens is that Yeshua heals someone on the Sabbath day. And the following day is the high Sabbath of the feast of Shavuot. So this is what happened. Yeshua came into town. He got there, and before the Sabbath, and on the Sabbath, there was a man who was lame. For 35 years, he laid in a bed. And Yeshua said, "Do you want to be healed?" And finally, after getting a straight answer from the man, he said, "Okay, then pick up your bed and walk." And so the man picked up his bed, and he walked. Yes, this is as fancy as it gets, ladies and gentlemen. It was not a Craftmatic three-way adjustable with a vibration attachment. It's just a bamboo mat, and that's all it is. He said, pick up your bamboo mat, stick it under your arm, and walk. You're healed. The man picked up his bed, and he walked. And immediately the Pharisees came down on him like a ton of bricks. Why are you breaking the Sabbath? Wait just a minute. This man was doing nothing any different than any one of them could have been doing that day, and probably were. But because he couldn't walk the day before, he couldn't do what was required by their rabbinic tradition. See, any Pharisee could have picked up that same bed, put it under his arm, and walked that day. Why? Because on Friday, they could have taken a basket from their house, anything from their house. They could have then walked a Sabbath day's journey from their house. And a Sabbath day's journey is a rabbinic invention anyway. Okay, there's no such thing in the scripture, but it does state it just because, you know, it became a common way for people to understand a particular distance. But all they had to do was go then just a Sabbath day's journey and put down one of their household possessions. And then from there, they could continue on another Sabbath day's journey and put down another one of their household possessions. Now, when the Sabbath comes, when the sun goes down, everything from their house to that second possession of theirs in the doorway of someplace is their house. They can carry anything they need to. But why couldn't this lame man do it? Because he couldn't walk the day before, so he couldn't go through all this rabbinic mishigas. Yeshua said, their rules and regulations have no authority. Yeshua never breaks the Sabbath and never teaches anyone to break the Sabbath. But what does he do? He breaks rabbinic tradition. He breaks rules and regulations that men have made up in order to manipulate, intimidate, and control other people. And it doesn't matter what the rules are. If you think that I have the right to make a flaming hoop and tell you to jump through it, and that your righteousness is dependent upon you jumping through my flaming hoops, if you think I have the authority, guess what? I will have you jumping through flaming hoops your whole life, because I'm in charge. So Yeshua says, you have no authority. Take up your bed and walk.
Yet again, Jesus is utterly ignoring the bad rules, the additions of God's law, the religious commands of these Pharisees, and he's telling someone to break the rules. Do not do as they are telling you. Instead, he heals them. He's doing good in direct violation to what their laws are. The Pharisees, they're not just the religious leaders. The religion of the day is the government of the day. And obviously, the Romans have Israel under occupation. So the Romans are like the overall authority. They're under Roman rule. But the Pharisees still have a lot of authority. They're granted the authority. And especially in regards to the religious aspects, like working on the Sabbath, their rules are law. So Jesus is clearly telling him to break that bad law that the Pharisees are putting in place. The takanot, the tradition that violates God's rules, God's implemented law. Don't work on the Sabbath, right? And Jesus clearly tells him, pick up your bed, which they consider work. And Jesus obviously knew this. And they argue over it. It's not lawful for you to do that, to carry your bed, and therefore this man can't be righteous. He cannot be the Messiah. He's breaking the rules. But obviously, he is the Messiah. He healed a man. Obeying the rules is not what's important. Obeying the rules of man, that is. It's not what comes first. Honoring God is what comes first. And as much as you can, if you can honor God without violating the rules and the laws of man, then do so. But here, again, Jesus is clearly violating these laws and ordering someone to do it. There is a higher priority. he that made me whole, the same said to me, take up your bed and walk. What man is that which said to you, take up your bed and walk? And he that was healed knew not who it was, for Jesus had conveyed himself away, a multitude being in that place. Now, verse 14. Afterward, Jesus finds him in the temple and said to him, behold, you are made whole. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come to you. This is repentance. Sin no more. The man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus. Okay, the reason why I'm saying it like that is because Jesus is a Jew. Jesus is of the tribe of Judah. That's what the word Jew comes from. It's of the tribe of Judah. So it's funny to me every time that, especially the Gospel of John, the Jews, that's the term used to refer to the Pharisees, the Levites, the priests, the scribes, all the negative religious controlling people are always referred to as the Jews. But it's not the best way of referring to them because they're all Jews. They're in the land of Judah. It's Israel, but the lost tribes of Israel were gone. They're dispersed. So the people who are left are known to be of the tribe of Judah. And there's some arguments about this, but Jews are people of the tribe of Judah. So to call just the Pharisees the Jews when Jesus is a Jew, it's kind of funny. So I don't take it seriously when he says the Jews showed up and they ruined the day. No. And told the Jews that it was Jesus which had made him whole. And therefore did the Jews persecute Jesus and sought to slay him. Said also that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. Then answered Jesus and said to them, verily, verily, I say to you, he that hears my word and believe on him that sent me has everlasting life, and shall not come into condemnation, but is passed from death to life. There is another that bears witness of me, and I know that the witness which he witnesses of me is true. You sent to John, and he bore witness of the truth. He was a burning and a shining light, and you were willing for a season to rejoice in his light. The works which the Father has given me to finish, the same works that I do, bear witness of me that the Father has sent me. Your works, your fruit, show what your motivation truly is, what your belief really is. Talk is cheap. What people do is how you judge them. Had you believed Moses, you would have believed me, for he wrote of me. But if you believe not his writings, how shall you believe my words?